He slammed the door so hard the frame rattled, leaving me standing on the front porch in my nightgown while the snow started falling even harder. Go to a nursing home. I don't care. I hope you freeze. Those were the last words my son, Jacob, shouted before turning the deadbolt and locking me outside at midnight in February in Minnesota. But what he didn't know was that our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been watching from her kitchen window. And she had information that would change everything. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You're probably wondering how a 58-year-old former high school principal ended up locked outside her own son's house in the middle of a snowstorm. Trust me, it definitely wasn't on my retirement bucket list. My name is Margaret Wells. And until 3 hours ago, I thought I was having a normal family dinner with my son Jacob and his wife, Stephanie. I'd been living with them for 8 months, ever since my divorce was finalized. 28 years of marriage gone the moment I found my ex-husband, Richard, in our bed with his secretary, but that's a story for another day. Today's story starts when I sold my beautiful 4-bedroom colonial, split the assets, and moved in with Jacob temporarily while I figured out my next steps. The argument that started all of this? Completely ridiculous, like most blow-ups tend to be. I made a simple comment about how the electric bill seemed higher than usual, and suggested maybe we could lower the thermostat a degree or two to save money. Innocent enough, right? Wrong. Stephanie immediately snapped that I was being controlling and nitpicky about how they ran their household. I'm just trying to be helpful, I said calmly. After 30 years in education, staying composed during confrontations was practically muscle memory. Helpful? Her voice got that sharp edge I'd grown to recognize over the months. You've been here 8 months criticizing everything: how we load the dishwasher, how we discipline Emma, how much we spend on groceries. Jacob, my only child, the boy I raised to be respectful, thoughtful, kind, just nodded along beside her like a bobblehead. Mom, you have to understand Stephanie's point. This is our house. The same house I helped them buy with a $20,000 down payment gift. The same house where I'd been paying a third of the mortgage since moving in, buying most of the groceries, and doing nearly all the cleaning because Stephanie was too busy with her part-time boutique job. I understand completely, I said, standing to clear the plates. I'll start looking for my own place tomorrow. That's when Jacob exploded. With what money, Mom? You're living here because you can't afford anywhere else. Dad got the better lawyer, remember? The cruelty in his voice stopped me cold. My own son was throwing my financial situation in my face. Never mind that. Part of that situation existed because I'd been so generous with them over the years. I have options, I said quietly. Stephanie let out an ugly laugh. Like what? You're 58, divorced, you worked in public education your whole life. You have no savings, no real job prospects, and no husband to take care of you anymore. I have you. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and instantly I regretted saying it. Jacob's expression twisted into something I didn't recognize. We never asked you to depend on us. Mom, we were helping you out, but we have our own lives. Emma's getting older and needs more space. Stephanie wants to start her business in the house. There just isn't room for everyone. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to consider other options. There are some really nice assisted living places around here. You'd have your own space, activities with people your age, meal plans, assisted living. I cut in. For a perfectly healthy 58-year-old woman whose only crime was getting divorced and trusting her family? I'm not ready for assisted living, Jacob. Well, you can't stay here forever. And that's when I made my mistake. I got angry. Forever? I've been here 8 months. And I've contributed more to this household than your wife does. Stephanie's face went white. Excuse me? You heard me. I pay for a third of everything. I do most of the cleaning. I help Emma with her homework. I cook dinner for nights a week. What exactly do you contribute besides complaints? And that was the moment Jacob completely lost it. He started yelling about disrespect and boundaries and how I'd been undermining their marriage since day one. Stephanie burst into dramatic tears, insisting I'd made her feel unwelcome in her own home. Everything spiraled out of control in about 5 minutes. The next thing I knew, Jacob was grabbing my arm and marching me toward the front door. You need to cool off outside for a few minutes and think about how you want to handle this, Jacob. It's snowing and I'm in my nightgown. Then maybe you'll think faster. The door slammed. The lock clicked. And there I stood on the porch, in my thin cotton nightgown and slippers, watching snowflakes fall onto my bare arms, while my son and daughter-in-law walked back into their warm house. The temperature was dropping fast. Probably already below 20. My fingers were going numb and I could feel the cold seeping through my slippers, soaking my feet. I banged on the door for about 10 minutes, calling Jacob's name, but no one answered. Either they couldn't hear me, or they were ignoring me. Panic started to rise in my chest as I wondered if I could make it to my car in the garage. Then I heard a voice, "Margaret. Oh my goodness, what are you doing out there?" Mrs. Patterson from next door was hurrying across her yard in a heavy coat and boots, her gray hair tucked under a knit hat. "I'm having a disagreement with Jacob," I said, trying to hide the humiliation in my voice. "In a nightgown? In February?" Her shock was obvious. "Come on. You're coming to my house right now before you get frostbite," I started to protest. But she was already taking my arm and guiding me across our snowy yards toward her warm front porch. "Helen, I can't impose on you like this nonsense. My brother's visiting for the week anyway. There's plenty of room." As we reached her door, she paused and glanced back at Jacob's house, her expression tightening. "Margaret, there's something you should know about your son's job situation." "What do you mean?" She opened the door and ushered me into the blessed warmth. "My brother is his boss." I froze. "What?" "My brother Peter runs the marketing division at Hartwell Industries. He's been Jacob's supervisor for the past year and a half." My mind began racing. Hartwell Industries was one of the biggest employers in town. If Helen's brother was Jacob's boss, then she probably knew things Jacob hadn't told me. "Helen," I said slowly, "is there something I should know?" She handed me a thick robe from her hall closet and gestured toward the living room sofa. "Honey, sit down. We need to talk." The hot chocolate Helen made was the most beautiful thing I'd seen all evening, partly because it smelled amazing and partly because my hands were finally warm enough to hold the mug. I sat wrapped in her late husband's terry cloth robe, thick wool socks on my feet, a crackling fireplace in front of me as the snow kept falling outside. Meanwhile, my son was probably asleep in his warm bed, entirely unconcerned about whether his mother had frozen to death on his porch. "Peter's upstairs on a work call, but he'll be down soon," Helen said, settling into the chair across from me. "Margaret, I need to ask you something and I want you to be honest." I nodded, even though my stomach tightened. I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever she was about to say. "How much do you know about Jacob's job performance lately?" The question caught me off guard. "I know he's been stressed, working longer hours. He's tired a lot. He mentioned a big project taking most of his time." Helen's expression went carefully neutral. "What else has he told you about work?" "Not much. Jacob's never been one to talk about his job in detail. When I ask about his day, he just says it was fine or busy." I paused, watching her face carefully. "Helen, what aren't you telling me?" Before she could answer, heavy footsteps came down the stairs, and a man, clearly her brother, appeared in the doorway. Peter Patterson looked to be around 60, tall and lean, with silver hair and the kind of presence that made it obvious he was used to being in charge. "You must be Margaret," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Peter. Helen told me what happened tonight. I'm glad she brought you in from the cold. Thank you for letting me stay." I said quietly, "I'll find somewhere else to go tomorrow." Peter and Helen exchanged a look I couldn't read. "Margaret," Peter said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table so he was directly facing me, "I need to tell you something about your son. And I need you to promise you'll hear me out before you react." My stomach tightened. "Is Jacob in trouble at work?" "Jacob's been on what we call a performance improvement plan for the past 6 months. Peter said gently. "It's a formal warning system. His work quality has declined significantly. He's missed several important deadlines. And there have been complaints from team members about his attitude." The words hit me like ice water. "What kind of complaints?" "Inappropriate comments in meetings, coming in late, leaving early without approval. And last month, he got into a verbal altercation with a co-worker that resulted in HR involvement." I set down my hot chocolate. My hands were shaking again, but not from the cold. "He never mentioned any of this. There's more," Peter continued. 3 weeks ago, Jacob came to my office asking for what he called a temporary salary advance. He said he needed $5,000 to cover unexpected medical expenses for you." "Medical expenses for me?" I whispered. "He told me you were having heart problems and needed surgery that insurance wouldn't fully cover." He was very convincing, talked about being worried about his mother's health and wanting to make sure you got the best care. I felt sick. "Peter, I haven't had any heart problems. I haven't been to the doctor for anything more than a routine checkup in over a year." Helen leaned forward. "Margaret, did Jacob ever give you $5,000 for medical expenses?" "No, God, no." I looked between them as the truth slammed into me. "He lied to get money from his boss." Peter nodded grimly. "I approved the advance because I believed him. Jacob's always come across as a decent kid, and helping an employee with a family medical emergency is something our company supports. The money was supposed to be deducted from his paychecks over 6 months. Was supposed to be? He's been pushing back on the deduction schedule, saying the amount is creating too much financial strain in your household. He asked if he could extend repayment to 2 years with smaller monthly amounts. The room tilted slightly. Jacob had lied to get $5,000, stolen the money, and then tried to extend the repayment while literally throwing me outside. For mentioning saving $20 a month on electricity, Peter. What happens if an employee defaults on a salary advance? His expression darkened. It becomes grounds for immediate termination. And if the money was obtained under false pretenses, the company can pursue legal action. I swallowed. What counts as substantial enough for legal action? $5,000 definitely qualifies. I sank back into the sofa, my mind racing. Jacob was in serious trouble. He'd lied, stolen money, was likely to lose his job. And here I was thinking he was just stressed from work and bills. No wonder he'd been irritable. No wonder he'd suddenly started talking about assisted living for me. He must have been panicking about how he was going to support his family, Margaret. Helen said softly, "There's something else you should know." I wasn't sure I could handle anything else, but I nodded. Last week, I saw Stephanie at the boutique where she works. She was showing her co-workers pictures of resorts in Hawaii, talking about booking a 2-week trip for March. Hawaii? I stared at her. They're planning a trip to Hawaii, a very expensive one from what I overheard. She was talking about first-class flights and staying at some luxury resort. The hypocrisy was staggering. They were planning a Hawaiian vacation while telling me they couldn't afford to let me live with them, while Jacob was lying about my medical bills. While he was stealing money from his job, Peter cleared his throat. "Margaret, I need to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest, of course." Peter folded his hands. "Do you have any documentation proving you haven't had the medical expenses Jacob claimed you did? Medical records? Insurance statements, anything that shows you haven't needed surgery or treatment for heart issues?" I thought about it. I have insurance statements from the past year showing I've only used my benefits for routine checkups and prescription refills for my blood pressure medication. Would that be enough? It would be a start. The thing is, Peter said carefully, if Jacob lied about a medical emergency to obtain that advance, it's not just a personnel matter anymore. It's potentially criminal fraud. The word fraud hung heavy in the air between us. My son, the boy I'd raised to be honest and responsible, had committed fraud against his employer. What are you suggesting? I asked. Peter leaned back, choosing his words with precision. I'm suggesting you may have more power in this situation than you realize. Jacob's job depends entirely on my discretion right now, his financial stability, his ability to pay his mortgage, his family's security. All of it hinges on whether I move forward with termination and legal action, or whether I find a reason to give him another chance. I stared at him as understanding slowly clicked into place. You're saying I have leverage. I'm saying that tomorrow morning, when Jacob realizes his mother spent the night at his boss's house, he might suddenly be very interested in having a different conversation about respect and about living arrangements. Helen smiled for the first time all evening. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a snowstorm and a well-timed revelation. I lifted my hot chocolate again, feeling warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the drink itself. My son had thrown me into the cold literally and figuratively. But by morning, he was going to learn he'd made a very expensive mistake. Peter, I said, what time do you usually get to work? 8:30. Why? I think Jacob and I need to have a conversation first thing in the morning. And I think it would help if he knew exactly who he's dealing with outside. The snow was still falling, but I wasn't worried about being cold anymore. If anything, I was starting to think Jacob was the one who should be worried about freezing. After all, revenge is a dish best served cold, and Minnesota in February is about as cold as it gets. I woke up at 6 a.m. in Helen's guest room to the sound of frantic knocking next door. Through the window, I saw Jacob on his porch in pajamas and a coat, clearly locked out of his own house. Stephanie must have been in the shower and couldn't hear him. The irony was delicious. Helen appeared in my doorway with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. Karma works fast around here, she said. Should I feel guilty for enjoying this so much? Honey, after what that boy put you through last night, enjoy every second. Peter was already dressed for work, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and phone at his side. Margaret, he said, I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Before we do anything, I want you to understand all your options. I sat at the table with my coffee, wrapped in one of Helen's bathrobes. I'm listening. Option 1, Peter began. You go back there this morning, apologize for whatever Jacob thinks you did wrong, and continue living in their house under whatever conditions they set. You'll likely be walking on eggshells for months, but you'll have a roof over your head. The thought made my stomach twist. What's option 2? Option 2, we use the information we have to reset the power dynamic. Jacob learns that actions have consequences. And you negotiate a better situation for yourself from a position of strength. And option 3? I asked. Peter's expression grew serious. Option 3, I handle this as a straightforward employment issue. I document Jacob's fraud, terminate his employment, and pursue legal action for the stolen advance. You'd need to find your own housing solution. But Jacob would face the full consequences of his choices. Without any special treatment because you're his mother. I looked out the window. Jacob had finally gotten back inside, probably through the garage. Stephanie was no doubt lecturing him for getting locked out. The same way he had locked me out. The symmetry was perfect. What would you do if I were your mother? I asked Peter. He didn't hesitate. I'd choose option 2, but I'd be strategic about it. What do you mean? Helen sat down at the table with us. What Peter means is that you don't go over there angry and emotional. You go over there calm, informed, and in control. You let Jacob dig himself deeper before you reveal what you know. Peter nodded. The key is to let him think he's still in charge, while you gather information about their real financial situation. How much money do they actually have? What are their real priorities? How willing are they to sacrifice your well-being for their own convenience? I was starting to like this plan, so I go back, act contrite, and see what they reveal when they think they have all the power. Exactly. Meanwhile, I can investigate the fraud situation at work, and we can figure out exactly how much trouble Jacob is really in, Helen added. My phone buzzed with a text message, Jacob's name on the screen. Mom, where are you? Your car is still here, but you're not in the house. Did you go for a walk? It's freezing outside. I showed the message to Peter and Helen. Helen snorted. He locked you out for hours and now he's worried about you taking a walk in the cold. What should I tell him? Peter thought for a moment. Tell him you're fine and you'll be home soon. Don't mention where you spent the night. Let him wonder. I typed back, I'm fine. We'll be home in a bit. We need to talk. The response came immediately. Mom, I'm really sorry about last night. I lost my temper and I shouldn't have locked you out. Stephanie and I both feel terrible. Helen raised an eyebrow. They feel terrible now that they don't know where you are. Another message popped up. Can we start over? Maybe we can figure out a better arrangement for everyone. A better arrangement? I said to myself. That's interesting phrasing. Peter was typing on his laptop. Margaret, I'm pulling up Jacob's employment file right now. I want to show you exactly what we're dealing with before you go over there. He turned the laptop toward me. Jacob's personnel record showed a steady decline over the past year. His annual review rating had dropped from exceeds expectations to meets expectations to needs improvement. There were multiple written warnings for tardiness, missed deadlines, and what HR delicately called interpersonal conflicts with colleagues. This is worse than you told me last night, I said. I was trying to be diplomatic. The truth is, Jacob's been on thin ice for months. The salary advance fraud was just the latest in a series of problems. I scrolled through the documents. There was a complaint from a female coworker about inappropriate comments Jacob had made during a team meeting. Another report about him leaving early without permission for what he claimed was a family emergency. But it turned out to be a golf outing with friends. Peter, how close is he to being fired even without the fraud issue? Very close. I'd already scheduled a meeting with HR for next week to discuss termination. The salary advance situation just accelerated the timeline. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jacob. Mom, please come home. Stephanie made your favorite breakfast. We really want to work this out. Your favorite breakfast? Helen looked skeptical. You don't have a favorite breakfast that Stephanie knows how to make. She barely knows how to make coffee. Peter closed his laptop. Margaret, when you go over there, I want you to pay attention to a few things. First, listen to how they talk about money. Are they really struggling financially, or are they just prioritizing other expenses? Second, notice how they treat you when they think they need something from you versus how they treated you last night when they thought they had all the control. And third, see if you can find out about this Hawaii vacation. If they're planning expensive trips while claiming they can't afford to let you live with them, that tells you everything you need to know about their priorities. I stood up and went to look out the window at Jacob's house. Their kitchen lights were on and I could see movement inside. They were probably preparing for the conversation we were about to have, maybe even planning their strategy for managing the mother they'd thrown out like trash just 12 hours ago. Helen, can I borrow some clothes? I want to look put together when I go over there. Of course, honey. What's your plan? I'm going to be the sweet, apologetic mother they expect me to be. I'm going to listen to their generous new offer from my living situation. I'm going to ask questions about their financial situation and their future plans. I turned away from the window and smiled at both of them. And I'm going to let them hang themselves with their own rope. Peter grinned. I like your thinking. And Margaret, yes? My business cards are on the hall table. Take one with you. Don't show it to them. But keep it in your pocket just in case you need to remind yourself that you're not powerless in this situation. What time is your meeting with Jacob about the salary advance? I haven't scheduled it yet. I was waiting to see how this morning plays out. Perfect. Give me 2 hours to have my conversation with them. Then we'll know exactly how this is going to go. I headed upstairs to get dressed, feeling more confident than I had in months. Jacob and Stephanie thought they'd played their trump card last night when they locked me out. They thought they'd shown me exactly how dependent and powerless I was. Instead, they'd just given me the information and motivation I needed to turn the tables completely. By the time I walked back into that house, I was going to know exactly what they were really thinking, what they really wanted, and what they were willing to sacrifice to get it. And then Jacob was going to get a phone call from his boss that would change everything. I knocked on my own son's front door at 8:15, wearing Helen's navy blue dress and carrying myself with the dignity of someone who definitely hadn't spent the night wondering if she was going to freeze to death. Jacob opened the door immediately, like he'd been watching for me from the window. Mom. Thank God we were so worried. He pulled me into a hug that felt more desperate than affectionate. Where were you? Your car was here, but you were gone all night. I found somewhere warm to stay, I said simply, stepping into the house that had felt like a trap just 12 hours earlier. Stephanie appeared from the kitchen, her hair perfectly styled and her smile absolutely radiant. Margaret, we're so glad you're okay. I made pancakes and bacon. Your favorite. Pancakes and bacon weren't my favorite anything, but I smiled graciously. That's very thoughtful, Stephanie. The dining room table was set with their good dishes, the ones they usually saved for company. Fresh orange juice in actual glasses instead of the plastic cups they normally used. Flowers from their yard arranged in a vase. They'd gone all out to create the impression that I was an honored guest instead of the woman they'd literally locked out in a snowstorm. Mom. Sit down, please, Jacob said, pulling out my chair. Stephanie and I stayed up most of the night talking about everything we realized we handled last night completely wrong. I sat down and waited. In my pocket, Peter's business card felt like a secret weapon. Stephanie brought out a plate of perfectly golden pancakes, and Jacob poured coffee into my cup with exaggerated care. The performance was almost convincing. The thing is, Jacob began, settling into his own chair. We've been under a lot of financial pressure lately, and I think we took it out on you unfairly. Financial pressure? I asked, adding just the right amount of concerned, motherly worry to my voice. Stephanie nodded, her expression serious. Jacob's been working so hard, taking on extra projects, trying to position himself for a promotion. It's been really stressful, extra projects. I almost choked on my orange juice. According to Peter, Jacob had been doing the opposite of extra work, a promotion? I asked, that sounds promising. Jacob's smile was tight. Well, it's not guaranteed yet, but my boss has been giving me more responsibilities. And I think it's heading in that direction. More responsibilities like being placed on a performance improvement plan and getting written up for missing deadlines. That's wonderful, honey. What kind of promotion are you hoping for? Department supervisor, he said without hesitation. It would mean a significant salary increase, better benefits, more security for our family. Stephanie reached over and squeezed his hand. We're trying to be optimistic, but it's scary when you're waiting to hear about something that could change your whole life. The lies were flowing so smoothly. I almost admired their creativity. Jacob wasn't being considered for a promotion. He was about to be fired. He wasn't taking on extra responsibilities. He was failing to meet basic job requirements, and he definitely wasn't getting a salary increase. He was on the hook for $5,000 he'd stolen by lying about my medical needs. I can understand how that kind of uncertainty would be stressful, I said sympathetically. Is there anything I can do to help? They exchanged a look across the table, the kind of quick glance that meant they'd rehearsed this conversation. Actually, Stephanie said, we wanted to talk to you about your living situation here. Here it comes. I thought, the truth is, Jacob continued, we love having you here. But the house is getting cramped with 3 adults and Emma, and if the promotion comes through, we'll be in a better position to help you find a really nice place of your own. What kind of place? Well, Stephanie's voice took on an enthusiastic tone. We've been researching some beautiful senior living communities in the area. Places with activities and social opportunities. Maybe a little apartment where you'd have complete independence, but also support if you need it. Senior living communities. They were still pushing the same agenda as last night, just with better packaging. Those sound expensive, I said carefully. They can be, Jacob admitted. But we'd help with the costs, especially once my promotion goes through. In fact, we've already looked at a few places just to get an idea of what's available. You've already looked? Stephanie nodded eagerly. There's one called Sunset Manor that's absolutely beautiful. Private apartments, meal plans, a fitness center, even a library. We drove by last week just to see what it looked like last week. They'd been apartment hunting for me while I was paying a third of their mortgage and doing their housework. And how much would a place like that cost? Around $3,000 a month, Jacob said. But like I said, we'd help with that. $3,000 a month. They expected to help with using a salary from a job he was about to lose and money he'd stolen from his employer. That's very generous, I said. But I'd want to contribute to my own expenses. I couldn't let you carry that burden, Mom. You don't have much in savings after the divorce. Stephanie said gently. We know Dad got the better deal in the settlement, actually. Richard had gotten the house and his retirement accounts, but I'd gotten half of everything else. Plus alimony. My savings weren't extensive, but they weren't non-existent either. I just hadn't advertised the details of my financial situation. I might have more resources than you realize, I said. Jacob leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean, I've been looking into my options, too. There might be some benefits available to me that could help with housing costs. It was technically true. I had been looking into my options, including the option of staying in their house and making them face the consequences of their choices. What kind of benefits? Stephanie asked. Oh, various programs for women over 55 who've gone through divorce. Housing assistance, job training programs, things like that. Jacob looked relieved. That's great, Mom, if you could qualify for some assistance. It would make the transition so much easier. Speaking of transitions, I said casually. When were you thinking this move might happen? Another exchanged glance. Well, Jacob said slowly, sooner might be better than later. How much sooner? Stephanie jumped in. We were thinking maybe by the end of the month. That would give you time to get settled before spring. And it would give us time to prepare for the promotion and everything that comes with it. End of the month. 2 weeks away. Two weeks seems quite fast, I said. We know it's a lot to ask, Jacob said. But honestly, Mom, I think you'll be happier with your own space, more independence. People your own age to socialize with, activities designed for seniors, people my own age. I was 58, not 88. And what about Emma? I asked, won't she miss having Grandma around? Stephanie's smile flickered for just a moment. Of course she'd miss me. They said, but she was at an age where she needed more privacy. Teenage girls, you know, Jacob added. Emma was 11. Then he said, you'll be able to visit anytime. Maybe Emma can even spend weekends with you at your new place. She'd probably love having sleepovers in a senior community. And just like that, the picture became painfully clear. They wanted me out immediately. They expected me to somehow pay for an expensive senior living facility with money I supposedly didn't have. And they imagined they could keep the relationship on their terms. An occasional visit here, a sleepover there. This all sounds very thoughtful, I said as I finished my pancakes. I really appreciate the planning you've done. They both looked relieved. So, you're okay with the timeline? Stephanie asked. Well, I said, I'll need to make some calls today. Check on those benefit programs. Maybe visit a few communities to see what's available, of course. Jacob said, take all the time you need today. We know it's a big decision. I glanced at my watch, 8:45. Peter would be at his office by now, probably wondering how my conversation was going. I should start making those calls right away. Some of those applications are time sensitive, I said. Absolutely, Stephanie replied. Use the house phone if you need long distance. I stood up, gathering my dignity like armor. Thank you both for breakfast and for being so understanding about last night. Jacob stood too. Mom, we're really sorry about how that went down. We never should have let it escalate. You're right, I said calmly. You shouldn't have. I walked toward the living room to get my purse, both of them trailing behind me with these hopeful, eager expressions. One more thing, I said casually as I turned back to them. I hope I didn't worry you too much by not coming home last night. I know you must have been concerned about where I was staying. We were worried, Jacob said. Where did you end up going? I smiled sweetly. I stayed with a neighbor. Lovely people. The husband works downtown in management somewhere. Very successful from what I can tell. I left that little seed planted in their minds and headed upstairs to gather my thoughts and start making calls. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Now I knew exactly how desperate they were to get rid of me, exactly how willing they were to lie about their finances, and exactly how little they valued what I brought to their household. Phase 2 was going to be much more interesting. I pulled Peter's business card from my pocket and picked up my phone. He answered on the first ring. How did it go? He asked. Even better than we hoped, I said softly, closing the guest room door behind me. They want me out by the end of the month. They've already been looking at senior living facilities. And Jacob told me he's being considered for a promotion to department supervisor. A promotion? Peter laughed a sharp, humorless sound. Margaret, I'm looking at a draft of his termination letter right now. Jacob's performance review is this afternoon. And it's not going to be pleasant. He said he's been taking on extra projects. More responsibilities, I added. The only extra responsibility Jacob has, Peter said, is explaining to HR why he lied about your medical expenses to steal $5,000 from the company. I looked out the guest room window at my car sitting in Jacob's driveway. Peter, they're planning something. This isn't just about wanting me out of the house. They've been working on this for weeks. What makes you think that? He asked. They've already researched senior living places. They have specific timelines. They had answers ready about finances and benefits. Stephanie even mentioned brochures and visiting facilities. You don't do that kind of research overnight. Peter went quiet. Margaret, what did they say about money? Are they offering to help pay for the senior living place? They said they'd help with the $3,000 monthly cost once Jacob gets his promotion. But they were very interested in what resources I might have. The moment I mentioned benefits programs, they were suddenly all ears. Resources, Peter repeated. I want you to try something. Tell them you've been approved for some kind of housing assistance, Peter said. But you need documentation of your current living expenses to finish the application. What kind of documentation? I asked. Mortgage payments, utility bills, food costs. Tell them you need to show exactly how much you're currently contributing to the household. I understood immediately. You want to see if they'll admit how much money I've been giving them. Exactly. If they're claiming financial hardship while taking substantial contributions from you, that's relevant to Jacob's employment situation. How is it relevant? I asked. Peter's voice shifted calmer, more serious. Because if Jacob is receiving significant financial support from family while claiming he needs salary advances for medical emergencies, it shows a pattern of financial dishonesty. Something much bigger than one fraudulent request. I hadn't thought of it that way. But it made perfect sense. Jacob had been taking money from me every month while crying poverty to his boss. There's something else, I said. I think they might be planning a vacation. Helen overheard Stephanie talking about Hawaii. When? March, according to Helen. First-class flights and a luxury resort. Peter was silent for a moment. Margaret, a vacation like that would cost at least $10,000, probably more. $10,000, I repeated, while they're asking you for salary advances and telling me they can't afford to let me stay here. I think we need to accelerate our timeline, he said. Can you find out more about this vacation? Dates, costs, how they're planning to pay for it? I can try. What about Jacob's work situation? I'm moving his review to 11 o'clock this morning. I want to confront him about the salary advance before he has time to prepare any more lies. I checked my watch. 9:15. So in less than 2 hours, Jacob is going to find out that his boss knows he committed fraud. That he lied about my medical expenses, yes, and what he won't know, at least not immediately, is that his boss's sister is the neighbor who took you in last night. The pieces were falling into place more perfectly than I could have imagined. Jacob would spend the morning believing he had everything under control, my living situation, his little plan, all of it. And by tonight, he'd be walking into a completely different conversation. Peter, what happens if he tries to blame me? If he claims I knew about the salary advance or approved it? Do you have documentation showing you haven't had medical expenses? Yes, I said. I have insurance statements going back a year. They show minimal claims, just routine checkups and my blood pressure prescription. Perfect. Bring those with you when you come back to Helen's house. I want copies before my meeting with Jacob. Should I tell Helen what's going on? Helen already knows. She's the one who suggested we accelerate the timeline. And she's the one who remembered Stephanie talking about vacation upgrades and spa packages, not just basic resort accommodations, upgrades. Spa packages. The cost was climbing higher and higher. Margaret, Peter said. I want you to do something else today. What? I want you to act like you're seriously considering their senior living plan. Ask them to drive you to look at facilities. See how eager they are to push things forward. You think they'll try to rush me into something? I think they're more desperate than they're showing. And if Jacob senses on any level that he's in trouble at work, he might be pushing even harder to get rid of what he sees as financial drains. Like his mother, who'd been contributing to his household for 8 months. I'll call you after I visit some facilities, I said. What time is Jacob's meeting? 11 o'clock. I'll call you as soon as it's over. I hung up and sat on the edge of the guest bed, looking around Helen's warm, cheerful room. Floral wallpaper. Photos of grandkids everywhere. 12 hours ago, I'd been a homeless woman in a nightgown, dependent on my son's charity and subject to his whims. Now I was a strategist with inside information and powerful allies. My phone buzzed. A text from Stephanie. How are those phone calls going? Any good news on benefits? I typed back, very promising, should know more this afternoon. I texted back. Stephanie replied instantly. Wonderful. Let us know if you need help with paperwork or applications. I smiled to myself, thinking about the paperwork Jacob would be handling in about an hour. Personnel files, insurance fraud documentation, termination letters. Another text came through. Jacob suggested we could drive you to look at a few places today. If you're interested, get a feel for what's available. They were eager. Very eager. That would be great, I typed. I'd love to see Sunset Manor and maybe one or two others. Perfect. We can leave whenever you're ready. I checked my watch again. 9:25. Jacob's workday was about to become very interesting. He just didn't know it yet. And I was about to spend the morning touring senior living facilities with two people who had no idea their financial house of cards was about to collapse. I gathered my insurance paperwork from my purse and headed downstairs. Phase 2 of the plan was officially underway, and I was realizing I had a real talent for strategic thinking. After 30 years of managing difficult teenagers and navigating school district politics, handling manipulative adults wasn't all that different. The stakes were just personal now, and I was highly motivated to win. Winter's Revenge, a story of justice served cold, Part 2 at exactly 11 o'clock. While I stood in the lobby of Sunset Manor pretending to be impressed by their craft room, Jacob's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went instantly pale. It's my boss, he said to Stephanie, voice tight. I need to take this. He stepped away, heading toward the parking lot while I continued my Oscar-worthy performance of examining activity schedules with the facility director, but my eyes stayed on Jacob through the window, and what I saw was a man's world collapsing in real time. First, his shoulders hunched forward like he was bracing for a hit. Then his free hand went to his forehead, the universal sign of someone receiving very bad news. By the time he hung up, his skin had gone from pale to a sickly gray. Everything okay? Stephanie asked when he returned, though she clearly already knew it wasn't. I have to go into work right now, he said. There's some kind of emergency meeting. Emergency meeting? She echoed, panic rising. Can't it wait? We're in the middle of helping your mother find a place to live. Jacob looked at me then, and for the first time all day, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Mom, I'm really sorry, but this can't wait. Can we continue the tour later? Of course, honey. Work comes first. I kept my voice warm and understanding, even as satisfaction glowed through me like sunlight. Is everything all right? You look worried, I said gently. I'm sure it's nothing serious. Probably just some paperwork issue that needs to be cleared up. Paperwork issue, well, that was one way to describe fraud charges. The drive back to their house was thick with tension. Jacob gripped the steering wheel like it was keeping him alive, while Stephanie peppered him with questions he clearly couldn't answer. What kind of emergency meeting happens with no notice? I don't know, Steph. Did you do something wrong? I don't think so. Well, what did your boss say exactly? He said there were some discrepancies in my personnel file that needed immediate attention. Discrepancies. Peter was handling this beautifully when we pulled into the driveway. Jacob's hands were literally shaking as he shut off the engine. I better change into a suit, he mumbled, heading inside like a man walking toward his execution. Margaret, Stephanie said suddenly, grabbing my arm before I could follow. What did you think of Sunset Manor? Her desperation was practically trembling in the air. Even now, with Jacob in full crisis, she was still focused on getting me out of their house. It was lovely, I said. Very clean, good security, nice amenities. So, you'd be interested in applying? I think so. But I'd want to see a few more places before making a final decision. Stephanie's smile strained at the edges. Of course. We want you to find the perfect fit inside. We could hear Jacob upstairs frantically opening and closing drawers, probably digging for his best tie, the same one he'd worn to job interviews before he got the job at Hartwell Industries. The irony was exquisite. Stephanie, I said carefully. Is Jacob under a lot of pressure at work lately? He seems more stressed than usual. Stephanie hesitated, and I could see her weighing how much to reveal. He's been working really hard for this promotion. Sometimes that means walking a fine line between being ambitious and being too pushy, you know. Too pushy, I said. That was an interesting way to describe lying to steal money. Has he mentioned any specific concerns about his job security? I asked. Why would you ask that? Well, he seems very anxious about this meeting, and you both seem eager to make changes to our living situation quickly. I just want to make sure I'm not adding to any financial stress you might be under. Stephanie's laugh was forced. Oh, no, we're fine. Financially. In fact, we've been planning a little getaway for March, Hawaii. We've been saving up for months. Saving up for months. While taking money from me and stealing from Jacob's employer, Hawaii sounds wonderful. Very expensive, though. Well, we got a good deal through Jacob's company travel program. Jacob appeared at the top of the stairs, dressed in his navy suit, looking like he was headed to a funeral instead of a meeting. I have to go, he called down. I'll probably be there for a few hours. Call me when you're done, Stephanie called back. He nodded and headed for the garage, leaving us alone in a house that suddenly felt much larger and quieter. More coffee? Stephanie asked, though I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Actually, I think I'll rest for a bit. The morning was more tiring than I expected. I headed upstairs to the guest room, closed the door, and immediately called Helen. He just left for his meeting, I said quietly. He looked like he was going to be sick. Peter called me 20 minutes ago, Helen said. Apparently Jacob tried to reschedule the meeting 3 times in 10 minutes, claiming he had family emergencies, doctor appointments, anything to avoid going in. Peter didn't let him reschedule. He told Jacob the longer he waited, the more serious the situation would become. That got him moving. I looked out the window and watched Jacob's car disappear down the street. Helen, Stephanie just told me they're planning a Hawaii vacation in March. She said they got a deal through Jacob's company travel program. His company travel program? Helen repeated, quiet for a moment. Margaret, Hartwell Industries doesn't have a company travel program. Of course they didn't. So she's lying about how they're affording this vacation. Either lying or Jacob has been lying to her about where the money is coming from. I thought about that. Given what I'd learned about Jacob's character over the past 24 hours, both options seemed equally likely. Helen, what happens if someone uses a company credit card for personal expenses? That would be embezzlement. Why? Just wondering if Jacob's financial problems might be bigger than we thought. My phone buzzed with a text message. Stephanie, Margaret. I know today has been overwhelming with the house tours and Jacob's work stress. Would you like me to make us some lunch? We could talk more about your housing options. She was still pushing. Even with her husband potentially losing his job, she was still focused on getting me out of the house. I typed back, that would be nice. I'll be down in a few minutes. Take your time. I'm making your favorite soup. My favorite soup. I didn't have a favorite soup that Stephanie knew how to make, but I was curious to see what she would come up with. I called Helen back. I'm going downstairs to have lunch with Stephanie and see what other lies she tells me. When do you think Peter's meeting with Jacob will be over? Could be anywhere from 1 to 3 hours, depending on how much Jacob tries to deny and how much evidence Peter presents. And then Jacob comes home to face his mother, not knowing she spent last night with his boss and his boss's sister. I looked at myself in the guest room mirror, straightening Helen's borrowed dress and checking my hair. 12 hours ago, I'd been locked out in the snow. Now, I was about to have lunch with my daughter-in-law while her husband explained to his boss why he'd committed fraud. Helen, I think I'm starting to enjoy this. I said, good, it's about time you realized how strong you are, she replied. I headed downstairs to discover what creative story Stephanie would tell me next, and to continue my performance as the grateful, dependent mother who didn't know that her whole world was about to change. Because Jacob's world was definitely about to change, and Stephanie was about to discover that their financial house of cards was built on far shakier ground than they'd realized. But first, I was going to find out exactly how deep their deception really went. The soup turned out to be Campbell's tomato from a can, which Stephanie served with a flourish, as if she'd been simmering it all morning. Your favorite, she announced. Though I'd never expressed any particular fondness for tomato soup, I smiled and thanked her, playing my role perfectly. Stephanie, can I ask you something? Of course, she settled across from me at the kitchen table with her own bowl. How long have you and Jacob been planning this Hawaii trip? Her face brightened immediately. Oh, months. It's going to be our second honeymoon. We haven't had a real vacation since Emma was born. It must be expensive, especially with the promotion still up in the air. Well, we've been saving. And like I said, Jacob got a great deal through work. Plus, we figured if the promotion comes through, we'll be in a much better financial position anyway. I nodded thoughtfully. It's smart to plan ahead. And I suppose with me moving to assisted living, you'll have more flexibility in your budget. Something flickered across her face. What do you mean? Well, you won't have the extra grocery costs, utility usage, that kind of thing. It probably adds up. Stephanie stirred her soup without eating it. I suppose it does. How much would you say my living here costs you per month? Just roughly. She was quiet for a long moment. Margaret, you contribute to expenses. We're not carrying you financially, I know. But I'm sure there are additional costs I don't think about. Food, heating, water usage. I'd hate to think I've been a burden without realizing it. You're not a burden. But she still hadn't answered my question about costs. Stephanie, I mentioned this morning that I might qualify for some housing assistance programs. One of the requirements is documenting my current living expenses. Could you help me put together those numbers? She set down her spoon. What kind of numbers? What I contribute to the household versus what my actual costs are. The program wants to see if there's a gap that needs to be filled. I could practically see her mind working. If she claimed my living expenses were high, it would justify getting me out of the house. But if she claimed they were low, it would contradict their story about financial pressure. I don't really keep track of those kinds of details, she said finally. Jacob might know. He's always been good with numbers. Jacob has a lot on his mind right now with work. Speaking of Jacob's work, you mentioned he's been under pressure lately. Has he been talking to you about specific problems? Stephanie's discomfort was becoming more obvious by the minute. Not really. He doesn't like to bring work stress home. That's admirable, though. Sometimes when people are worried about job security, they start making changes at home to prepare for different scenarios. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? Oh, just things like reducing expenses, adjusting living arrangements, making sure they have financial flexibility in case something changes. Jacob's job is secure. The promotion is practically guaranteed. It was fascinating how confidently she could say something that was completely false. My phone rang. Helen's number. Excuse me, I should take this. I stepped into the living room. Hello, Margaret. Peter just called. The meeting is over already. Jacob confessed everything within the first 20 minutes. Apparently, once Peter started showing him the evidence, he broke down completely. What did he confess to? The fake medical emergency, the salary advance fraud. And get this, he also admitted to using company resources for personal projects, including researching vacation packages on company time. So, he had been using work resources to plan the Hawaii trip. What happens now? Peter gave him two options. Option 1, immediate termination, full repayment of the salary advance, and referral to law enforcement for fraud charges. Option 2, resignation with a neutral reference, repayment plan for the salary advance, and no criminal charges. Which did he choose? He's thinking it over. Peter gave him until 5 o'clock to decide. I looked at my watch. 2:15. Jacob had less than 3 hours to decide between being fired for fraud or resigning in disgrace. Helen, does Stephanie know any of this yet? I asked, not unless Jacob called her from Peter's office, which he didn't. Peter was with him the entire time. So she's upstairs making lunch plans while her husband is deciding between criminal charges and unemployment. Exactly, Margaret. There's something else, Helen continued. Peter asked Jacob directly about his home financial situation. Specifically, he asked whether Jacob was receiving financial support from family members while claiming hardship. At work, my stomach clenched. What did Jacob say? He admitted, you've been contributing significantly to household expenses for months. He also admitted that the financial pressure he's been under was partly because he's been planning expensive purchases while maintaining a lifestyle his salary couldn't actually support. Expensive purchases like Hawaiian vacations. I muttered. Peter documented all of this, every word. Margaret, Helen said. Jacob essentially confessed that he's been living beyond his means while taking money from both you and his employer under false pretenses. I looked toward the kitchen, where Stephanie was probably still waiting for me to return and continue our conversation about my living expenses. What should I tell her? I asked. Nothing yet. Let Jacob come home and tell her himself. But Margaret, you need to be prepared. When Jacob gets home, he's going to be desperate. People do unpredictable things when they're cornered. You think he might try to blame me? I think he might try anything. But here's the thing, you now have all the leverage. Peter has documentation of Jacob's confession. You have proof that they've been planning to move you out while taking your money. And you have a neighbor who witnessed them locking you outside in a snowstorm. So what do I do? You wait. Let Jacob come home and explain to his wife why their Hawaii vacation just got canceled and why their mortgage is about to become a lot harder to pay. Then you decide what kind of relationship you want with them going forward. I hung up and returned to the kitchen where Stephanie was still sitting with her untouched soup. Everything okay? She asked. Just a neighbor checking on me after last night, I said. She looked relieved. That's nice. Which neighbor? I smiled. Mrs. Patterson, she's very sweet. Stephanie nodded absently. Margaret, I was thinking while you were on the phone. Maybe we should look at a few more senior living places this week. Just to give you a good range of options. Still pushing. Even now, she was trying to speed up my departure. That sounds like a good idea, though. I suppose a lot depends on what Jacob learns about his promotion situation. What do you mean? Well, if the promotion doesn't come through, you might need to reconsider the timeline for my move. Senior living is expensive. And I wouldn't want you to overextend yourselves financially just to help me. Stephanie's smile was tight. We'll make it work either way. You're both so generous. I hope Jacob knows how lucky he is. I think we're all lucky to have each other, she said. I finished my soup and carried my bowl to the sink, thinking about luck and family and the difference between being generous and being used. In about 3 hours, Jacob was going to walk through that front door with news that would change everything. And Stephanie was going to discover that all her careful planning for my departure had been based on circumstances that no longer existed. But first, I was going to enjoy watching her continue to plan for a future that was never going to happen. After all, there's something deeply satisfying about knowing the ending when everyone else is still reading the middle of the story. Jacob didn't come home at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. By 8 p.m., Stephanie was pacing the living room like a caged animal, checking her phone every 30 seconds and jumping every time she heard a car in the distance. This isn't like him, she kept saying. He always calls if he's going to be late. I sat on their couch, ostensibly reading a magazine, but actually watching her unravel with clinical fascination. She'd tried calling Jacob 6 times in the past hour, each call going straight to voicemail. Maybe his meeting ran long, I suggested helpfully. What kind of meeting lasts 9 hours? The kind where your husband has to choose between criminal fraud charges and voluntary resignation. I thought, should we call the office? Stephanie asked. What if something happened to him? I'm sure he's fine. Jacob's always been responsible about taking care of himself. Responsible. That was generous, considering his recent track record. At 8:30, car doors slammed in the driveway. Stephanie rushed to the window, then froze. He's not alone. There's someone with him. I joined her at the window. Jacob was walking up the driveway with another man, both of them looking like they'd spent the day at a funeral. The other man was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with the authority of someone used to handling difficult situations. Who do you think that is? Stephanie whispered. I had a pretty good idea, but I kept my expression puzzled. Maybe someone from work. The front door opened, and Jacob's voice carried into the living room. Steph. Mom, we need to talk. We gathered in the living room, where Jacob introduced his companion as Mr. Richardson from the company's legal department. Mr. Richardson had the poker face of someone who'd delivered bad news many times. Before it, I asked Mr. Richardson to come with me, because there are some legal implications to what I need to tell you, Jacob began, his voice shaky. Stephanie sank into her chair. Legal implications, Mom? Stephanie, I need to tell you both something, and I need you to let me get through it before you ask questions. I nodded encouragingly, though inside I thought this was going to be better than any television drama. I'm no longer employed at Hartwell Industries. As of this afternoon, I submitted my resignation. Stephanie's face went white. What, Jacob? What happened? There were some irregularities in my personnel file. Financial irregularities. Mr. Richardson spoke for the first time. Mr. Wells obtained a salary advance under false pretenses. Specifically, he claimed the advance was needed for emergency medical expenses for his mother. All eyes turned to me. I arranged my expression into confusion and concern. Medical expenses? Jacob, what medical expenses? Jacob couldn't meet my eyes. I told them you needed heart surgery and that insurance wouldn't cover all the costs. Heart surgery? My voice rose perfectly. Jacob, I haven't needed any surgery. I don't have heart problems. I know, Mom, I know. I lied. Stephanie was staring at him like she'd never seen him before. You lied to steal money from your employer. It wasn't stealing, exactly. I was planning to pay it back. Mr. Richardson cleared his throat. The advance was for $5,000. Mr. Wells has made no payments toward repayment in the 6 weeks since he received the funds. $5. 0. They didn't have while planning Hawaiian vacations and trying to get me to move to expensive senior housing. Jacob, I said quietly, where did that money go? Living expenses, bills, the mortgage payment last month when I came up short. Stephanie was doing the math in her head, and I could see the moment she realized the implications. The Hawaii trip, she whispered. We can cancel that. Jacob said quickly. I already started looking into the cancellation policies, Stephanie said. The deposits are non-refundable. We put down $3,000 just last week. Mr. Richardson made a note on his legal pad. Mr. Wells, as we discussed this afternoon, you have 30 days to begin repayment of the advance. The company has agreed not to pursue criminal charges provided you meet the payment schedule. What if he can't make the payments? Stephanie asked. Then the matter will be referred to law enforcement for prosecution. The room fell silent except for the tick of their antique wall clock. Jacob looked like he'd aged 10 years in one day, and Stephanie kept opening and closing her mouth like she couldn't find words. There's something else, Jacob said finally. Something else? Of course there was. My resignation means we'll lose our health insurance at the end of the month. And obviously the promotion I mentioned isn't happening. Stephanie stood up abruptly. I need some air. She walked out of the room, and a few seconds later we heard the back door slam. Mr. Richardson gathered his papers. Mr. Wells, you have my card. The first payment is due in 30 days. I'd suggest you start looking for employment immediately after he left. Jacob slumped into his chair like all the air had gone out of him. Mom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about all of this. Jacob, help me understand something. You took $5,000 by lying about my medical bills. But you've also been talking about a promotion and planning expensive vacations. Where did you think the money for all of that was going to come from? He ran his hands through his hair. I thought the promotion was going to happen. I thought I could pay back the advance and everything would work out. But you weren't actually being considered for a promotion, were you? He looked up sharply. How did you know that? Interesting question. I didn't know it, Jacob. I'm asking. No, I wasn't being considered for a promotion. I was actually in trouble for poor performance. I was probably going to be fired anyway, so… The story you told me this morning about taking on extra responsibilities was a lie, too. Everything I told you this morning was a lie. His voice broke. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I stood up, looking down at my son, sitting in his expensive living room, surrounded by the trappings of a lifestyle he couldn't afford, paid for with money he'd stolen, and contributions from a mother he'd locked out in a snowstorm. Jacob, I have one more question for you. What? When you locked me outside last night, were you planning to use that as justification for moving me to assisted living? Make it seem like I was becoming difficult and couldn't live independently? His silence was answer enough. I see. I picked up my purse from the side table. I'm going to stay with a friend tonight. We can continue this conversation when you've had time to think about what kind of relationship you want to have with me going forward. Mom, where are you going? Which friend? I paused at the living room doorway. Someone who doesn't lock family members outside in snowstorms and then lie about their medical bills to steal money. Mom, please don't leave. We can work this out. Jacob, for the first time in months, I'm going to sleep somewhere I feel welcome and safe. I suggest you spend tonight figuring out how to explain to your wife why your financial planning was based on fraud and fantasy. I left him sitting alone in his living room, probably calculating how he was going to make mortgage payments without a job, without stolen money, and without his mother's financial contributions. Outside, I could see Stephanie on the backyard deck in the cold February air, probably doing the same calculations. But I wasn't worried about either of them anymore. I was walking across the snow-covered yard toward Helen Patterson's warm, welcoming house, where people told the truth and treated family members with respect. And tomorrow, I was going to decide exactly what my life was going to look like going forward. For the first time in months, all the choices were going to be mine. I woke up Thursday morning in Helen's guest bed to the sound of frantic knocking. Not next door this time, but on Helen's front door. Through the window, I could see Stephanie on the porch at 7 a.m., still wearing yesterday's clothes and looking like she hadn't slept. Helen appeared in my doorway with coffee and a grim expression. She's been out there for 10 minutes. Should I let her in? Let's see what she wants. I followed Helen downstairs and watched through the living room window as she opened the front door. Stephanie, what are you doing here so early? Is Margaret here? I need to talk to her. It's an emergency. What kind of emergency? Please, Mrs. Patterson, I know she's here. I saw her come over last night. Helen stepped aside to let Stephanie in, and I appeared at the top of the stairs in Helen's robe, looking like I'd just woken up. Stephanie, what's wrong? I asked. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, desperation written across her face. Margaret, we need to talk privately. I came downstairs slowly, letting her wait. Helen, would you mind giving us a few minutes? I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, Helen said. But her tone suggested she'd be listening to every word. Stephanie and I sat in Helen's living room, and I waited for her to begin. Margaret, I had no idea about any of what Jacob told us yesterday. I swear to you, I had no idea he lied to his boss or took that money. I believe you. You do? Jacob's been lying to both of us, apparently, though in different ways. Stephanie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know what we're going to do. He doesn't have a job. We owe $5,000 we don't have, and our mortgage payment is due next week. I nodded sympathetically. That does sound like a difficult situation. The thing is, she continued, and I could tell she was building up to something. We were hoping you might be able to help us figure out a solution. Here it comes. What kind of solution? Well, you mentioned yesterday that you might qualify for assistance programs. If you could get approved for housing assistance, and if we could work out some kind of arrangement where you stayed here a little longer, maybe we could all help each other through this rough patch. Fascinating. When they thought Jacob had a secure job and a promotion coming, they wanted me out immediately. Now that they were facing financial disaster, they wanted me to stay and continue contributing to their expenses. Stephanie, yesterday you were eager to have me move to senior living by the end of the month. What's changed? She had the grace to look ashamed. I realize now that we were being unrealistic about the timeline, and honestly, we were probably being unfair about the whole situation. Unfair how? We should have been more grateful for your help with expenses. Instead of treating your contributions like they were temporary, we should have recognized that you were helping us maintain a lifestyle we couldn't actually afford. Finally, some honesty. So, you're saying you need my financial help to keep the house? I'm saying we need time to figure out how to restructure everything. Jacob needs to find a new job. We need to pay back that money. And we need to cancel the vacation. Have you started looking into the vacation? Stephanie's face crumpled. The deposits are non-refundable. $3,000 down the drain. Plus, we'll owe cancellation fees for the rest. How much will the cancellation fees be? Probably another $2,000. So, they'd lost $5,000 on a vacation they'd planned while taking money from me and stolen from Jacob's employer. Stephanie, can I ask you something honestly? Of course, how long have you known that Jacob was having problems at work? She was quiet for a long moment. I suspected something was wrong for a couple months. He was stressed, secretive about phone calls, staying late but not getting any overtime pay. But when I asked him about it, he said he was working hard for the promotion. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. Margaret, the truth is we've been living beyond our means for over a year. The house payment, Emma's private school, my car payment, the credit cards. We needed Jacob's income to increase, not decrease. So when he told you about the promotion, you started planning based on money you didn't have yet. Yes. And when you moved in and started helping with expenses, it felt like breathing room. We should have been honest about how much we needed that help instead of making you feel like you were imposing. I looked around Helen's comfortable living room, thinking about the difference between being needed and being valued. Stephanie, what exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking if you'd consider staying with us while we work through this crisis. And I'm asking if you'd be willing to help us restructure our finances so we can all live together more sustainably. What would that look like? We'd need to know exactly what resources you have available. Income, savings, whatever assistance programs you might qualify for. Then we could create a budget that works for everyone. She wanted access to my complete financial information so they could plan around it, and in exchange you'd have a stable place to live and we'd all work together as a family to get through this. I stood up and walked to Helen's window, looking across at the house where I'd been locked outside just 2 days ago. Stephanie followed me. Margaret, I know we made mistakes, big mistakes, but we're family. Families help each other. I turned to face her. Stephanie, families do help each other. But help is voluntary and it's mutual and it's based on respect. I understand that now, do you? Because 2 days ago, you locked me outside in a snowstorm when I suggested saving $20 on the electric bill. Yesterday, you were touring senior facilities to get me out of your house as quickly as possible. Today, you want me to stay and share my financial information so you can plan your budget around my contributions. Stephanie's face flushed. I know how it sounds. How does it sound? I asked, like we only want you when we need your money. That's exactly how it sounds, I said. Because that's exactly what it is. She started crying then. Big, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. Margaret, I don't know what else to do. We're going to lose everything. I felt a moment of sympathy for her. But then I remembered standing on that porch in my nightgown while snow fell around me. Stephanie, you're going to lose some things. That's what happens when you make financial decisions based on fraud and fantasy. But you're not going to lose everything. And you're certainly not entitled to my help in avoiding the consequences of your choices. So, you won't help us? I didn't say that. I said, I won't help you avoid consequences. There's a difference. She looked up at me with desperate hope. What do you mean? I sat back down, folding my hands in my lap. I mean that if you want my help, it comes with conditions. Real conditions. Not the pretend gratitude you've been showing me. What conditions? And that's when I smiled because I'd been thinking about this all night. I knew exactly what I wanted. First, Jacob needs to get a job. Any job. I don't care if he's flipping burgers or stocking shelves. But he needs to start earning money immediately to pay back that $5,000. Stephanie nodded frantically. Second, you need to sell your car and buy something you can actually afford. But my car is almost paid off. Your car payment is probably $400 a month. You can't afford $400 a month for a car when you don't have jobs. She nodded again, though less enthusiastically. Third, Emma comes out of private school immediately and goes to public school. like millions of other kids whose parents can't afford expensive tuition. But her education will be just fine in public school. I taught in public schools for 30 years. And I can assure you that expensive doesn't automatically mean better, okay? What else? I stood up again, looking down at her. Those are the conditions for you to avoid losing your house. The conditions for my help are different. Different how? If you want me to contribute financially to your household, I become an equal partner in all decisions about that household. Budget decisions, vacation planning, major purchases, guest policies, everything gets discussed with me first. That seems fair. And Jacob goes to therapy. Real therapy with a licensed counselor. To figure out why he thinks lying and stealing are acceptable ways to solve problems. Stephanie was quiet for a moment, and if we agree to all of this, then I'll consider staying and helping you rebuild your finances responsibly. But Stephanie, if anyone in that house ever treats me with disrespect again, if anyone locks me out or talks to me like I'm a burden, I'll be gone that same day and I'll take my financial contributions with me. She stared at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. Margaret, I had no idea you were this strong. Neither did I said. Until you gave me reason to find out. 6 months later, I stood in my new kitchen, making coffee and watching through the window as Jacob left for his job at the hardware store. It wasn't the prestigious position he'd imagined for himself, but it was honest work that paid enough to cover his share of the household expenses and make payments on his debt to Hartwell Industries. The kitchen was smaller than the one in Jacob and Stephanie's house, but it was mine. The little 2-bedroom condo I'd purchased was perfect for my needs, with enough space for Emma to visit on weekends and a guest room for the friends I'd made in my new life. My phone rang as I was adding cream to my coffee. Stephanie's name appeared on the screen. Good morning, I answered. Hi, Margaret. I just wanted to call and thank you again for everything you did yesterday. Yesterday had been Emma's first science fair at her new public school, and I'd helped her put together a project about weather patterns. She'd won second place and was absolutely thrilled. Emma did all the work. I just helped her organize her thoughts. Still, she was so excited to have me there. We all were. Things had been different since that morning in Helen's living room 6 months ago. Not perfect, but different. Jacob had followed through on every condition I'd set. He'd gotten the hardware store job within 2 weeks, started therapy sessions, and hadn't missed a single payment to Hartwell Industries. Stephanie had sold her expensive car and bought a reliable used Honda. Emma had transitioned to public school without any academic problems, and had made new friends almost immediately, but I hadn't moved back in with them. Instead, I'd used the money I'd saved during my months with them, plus the equity from my divorce settlement that I'd been carefully managing to buy my own place. Small, but mine. How are things going with the new budget? I asked. Better than expected, actually. It turns out we can live on a lot less than we thought we could. Who knew? There was humor in her voice now. Something that had been missing during those months when they'd been living beyond their means and lying to themselves about their finances. And Jacob, she added. He seems happier, believe it or not. Less stressed. I think all that lying and scheming was eating at him more than he wanted to admit. Jacob had surprised everyone, including himself, by being good at retail work. He was patient with customers, knowledgeable about home improvement projects, and had already been promoted to assistant manager. What about the vacation plans? I asked. Stephanie laughed. We're planning a weekend camping trip for Labor Day. Emma's more excited about roasting marshmallows than she ever was about Hawaii. Sometimes the simple pleasures are the best ones. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret not staying with us? I mean, I know we gave you every reason to leave, but do you ever think about what it might have been like if we'd all lived together respectfully from the beginning? I looked around my sunny little kitchen, thinking about the book club I joined, the volunteer work I'd started at the literacy center, the independence I'd rediscovered. Stephanie, I think everything worked out exactly as it was supposed to. Even the night Jacob locked me out, especially that night. If that hadn't happened, I never would have discovered how strong I could be on my own. After I hung up, I walked out to my small patio to water the plants I'd arranged there. Next door, Helen Patterson was working in her garden. Morning, Margaret. How are my favorite neighbors? She called. Just got off the phone with Stephanie. Emma won second place at the science fair yesterday. That's wonderful. Are you still planning to take her to the museum next weekend? Wouldn't miss it. Helen straightened up, brushing dirt off her gardening gloves. You know, I was thinking about that night you showed up on my doorstep in your nightgown. What about it? I asked. I was thinking that sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the best things that ever happened to us. I considered that while watching a butterfly land on my petunias. Helen, do you think I would have found the courage to change my life if Jacob hadn't forced the issue? I think you would have found it eventually. But maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe my phone buzzed with a text message. Emma, Grandma Margaret. Can you teach me how to make chocolate chip cookies this weekend? Mom said you have the best recipe. I typed back, of course, sweetheart. We'll make enough for you to take some home to your parents. Another text came through immediately. Dad wants to know if you need help with anything around your condo. He says he owes you about 1,000,000 favors. I smiled, thinking about how different our family dynamic had become. I was no longer the dependent mother living on their charity. I was the independent grandmother who chose to stay involved in their lives because I wanted to, not because I had to. Tell your dad I'm fine, but thank you for asking. Love you, Grandma Margaret. Love you too, Emma. I finished watering my plants and went back inside to get ready for my day. I had a volunteer shift at the literacy center this afternoon, and tonight I was meeting my book club to discuss our latest selection. As I was getting dressed, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, grateful for any scrap of inclusion, willing to accept disrespect just to have a place to belong, convinced that my financial contributions were the most valuable thing I had to offer. That woman felt like a stranger now. The woman I had become understood that respect isn't negotiable, that love without boundaries isn't really love, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is refuse to enable their bad decisions. Jacob and Stephanie had learned to live within their means because I refused to subsidize their financial fantasy. They had learned to value my presence because I had shown them I was perfectly capable of living without their approval. And Emma was growing up seeing a grandmother who was strong, independent, and unwilling to settle for less than she deserved. My doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery truck. A package for Margaret Wells. I signed for it and carried it inside, curious. The return address was Helen's. Inside was a framed photograph of the three of us, Helen, Peter, and me, taken at Peter's retirement party last month. We were all smiling, dressed up for the occasion, looking like the unlikely family we'd become. A note was attached in Helen's handwriting. For the woman who taught us all that sometimes justice comes disguised as a snowstorm. With love and admiration, Helen and Peter. I set the photograph on my kitchen counter where I could see it while making breakfast, thinking about justice and family and the difference between being chosen and being settled for. 6 months ago, I'd been locked out of a house where I was tolerated only as long as I was useful. Today, I was surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was. The snow had melted months ago, but the lessons from that cold February night stayed with me. Sometimes you have to be willing to stand alone in the cold before you can find your way to real warmth. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's building a life so good that you're grateful to the people who forced you to find your own strength. I made myself a proper breakfast, something I'd never bothered with when I was focused on taking care of everyone else first. Then I sat at my own table in my own kitchen in my own home and planned my day exactly the way I wanted. At 58, I'd learned that independence isn't about never needing anyone. It's about knowing that you'll be fine either way, and choosing your relationships from a place of strength rather than fear. And that knowledge was worth every minute I'd spent shivering on that snowy porch, waiting for someone to save me before I realized I could save myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.